Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. This is Gary Cinderbrandt, your host for this podcast. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Candice Ammori. Candice is a graduate level data scientist in biostatistics. It's had a pretty interesting journey and now devotes the majority of her time to trying to not only raise client risk awareness, but actually one of the few people that are actually doing something about it in a cross-disciplinary fashion, where she's bringing in everyone from scientists to activists to investors to technology people to people in the political sphere as well, which we'll certainly drop into as we go. As I understand it, Candice, your background initially was in the ethical use of artificial intelligence, and I'd really like to hear about that as we kick off, but welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you with me today.
Thank you, Gary. I'm very excited. And as I said beforehand, you have an amazing podcast voice, and it's fun to see it live. But yeah, my background, in my 20s was actually starting off in business communications, microfinance, and then tech. And so I did things in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Cambodia. And by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was like, maybe I should take life seriously and figure out where I want to go for the rest of my life. And I ended up getting really interested in data science. And then after understanding some of the mathematical, statistical, computer science pieces of it, understood a bit more about the risks involved. And the simplest way that I can explain it is that AI, usually when we think about doing a statistical study, we control the data that comes in. We control so much of the study. But when it comes to AI, the data that comes in is all observational. So it's coming from the general world. And what I was learning to do is build these sort of feedback loops within AI so it would get smarter based on the data it was getting. But the problem is that the data is just as sexist and homophobic and racist and all the things that maybe we don't want to be as humans, but it's still out there. And so it sometimes becomes more of those if we're not careful, if we're not thinking about how to clean the data or how to, direct the algorithm in a certain direction. So that was one problem. The second is just the black boxness of AI, the fact that it's really hard. And there are some people who are working on it now because they sort of keep a pulse on ethics of AI. So I think we all should keep a pulse on ethics of AI, given where we're at right now. But it's hard to understand why these things have gotten to where they are. And so that's a brief background on where I was at and why I got interested in ethics of AI. And I thought, this is an existential problem that if I'm going to spend my life doing something, one thing that I'll feel really proud of, working on this would, I think, be really worthwhile. And I got into grad school and started in 2018, and that's when I made some more of my transition.
So you elevated your ability to, I would say, objectify the data, which was largely in these large language models is subjective because there's little to no control. And let's leave like the math and the coding and all that stuff on the other side, because math is just math. Mm-hmm. But these large language models would suck in data from wherever they could find, including podcasts, by the way, and then try and come up with some consensus with no controls whatsoever. And it's easy to understand and predict that you're not always going to get something out of there. Sometimes it might be accurate, sometimes it might be precise, but sometimes it might be some whacked out hallucination that the algorithm just didn't pick up. But I do like the fact that when you started to look at data science and the concept of merging machine learning with AI, which most people don't think about, but you program things to get smarter as they go, just kind of like most humans, I would hope. We try and get smarter as we go. I think that that could lead us in a positive direction. So, as you elevated your academic credentials and had the ability to understand things on a deeper level, you came upon a report in 2018 which caused a bit of a life change for you. Tell me about that.
Yes, many existential crises to sort of get to where we are today. The first one I would say is in AI, understanding what that could look like if we're not really thoughtful. And then the second was when the 2018 IPCC report came out. And the reason why that struck me was actually because I've been working in the data AI space and could see how these feedback loops turn into sort of runaway things, right? And so it might become runaway racist, for example, or runaway hallucinating. And in the 2018 report on climate, it's this big UN report. And the major finding and the major sort of takeaway was that there are these feedback loops as well in the atmosphere. And so a simple one is that as permafrost in the Arctic starts melting, it actually releases more methane, which then increases climate change, global warming, which then means that more permafrost then melts. And so it's these quote unquote positive feedback loops that are bad for us. And what we don't want to do is get to the place where these feedback loops just go haywire, where we actually cannot stop them. And we have, the entire system is off kilter. And so reading that report with more of the AI data science feedback loop sort of perspective that I was building was terrifying. And I essentially thought, I'm working on this, what I think is an existential crisis potentially over here, but I actually want to be working on this crisis that is pretty close to potentially coming true and also affects everyone, and which we can get to eventually has a lot of intersections with AI today. The two spaces have sort of converged in an interesting way.
For the sake of our listeners, the IPCC report you refer to as the Intergovernmental Panel for Policy Change. What countries did not participate in that?
It's a great question. Did the US not participate? I hope they did.
I don't know. I hope they did.
Yeah.
I could ask Perplexity and it could probably tell me, but I can also probably guess.
Yeah, back then I think we did, but
okay.
I'd be curious about China. But China now is also ahead on solar. And so the whole geopolitical side of things is fascinating when it comes to climate.
So you talk about the concept of this tipping point, which I completely understand. And you can't go up on YouTube without seeing some huge glacier calve into, the water around it. And now, instead of just being horrified, there's people surfing that wave. So there's a problem that's always been there in that for most people, they get up, they do what they do, they go to bed and rinse and repeat. And that's how they live their lives. And unless it has a direct impact on them at the moment, it's not something they really consider. Where if you step back and you look at it with kind of an agnostic point of view and you read the math, not even the opinion, just read the math, it's a real holy shit moment. And we seem to be in that in somewhat of a suspended fashion. The awareness issue at the local level, at the individual person who's getting up and going to work and coming home and just trying to pay the bills at the end of the day, it's not always top of mind. How do you get that messaging through to the point where you can generate the broad support at the grassroots level while there's still grass?
I take the viewpoint that most people are good and that it actually is humanity's the human Homo sapiens ability to collaborate that has gotten us as far as we are. It's not actually true that we're ruthless at the core, and there's some great studies on that as well. And so I believe humans are good. I also know that there's some statistic about how 80+% of the 8 billion people on this planet right now believe that climate change is real and we should be doing more about it. And and have that as a core value. And we look at what's actually happening, and there's no, it's actually, things are accelerating in the wrong direction in terms of, more fossil fuel use, in terms of, 100-year storms that are happening every year more often. And so the particular viewpoint that I take is that it's the systems, not the people, because I've met so many great people who wish that they could do more, want to be doing more, have no idea what to do, and also are just focused on bills and kids and things that are super urgent that they have to be focused on. And so when I think about this, I think about, one, how can it be clear to, how can climate become an affordability issue? How can it become a health issue? How can it become a community well-being issue, which it is all of these things? It actually does, increase our health if we're using fewer fossil fuels, air pollution, longevity of life, right? Like all these things are clear. Community, can we eat more locally? Can we go to the farmer's market, right? These are tiny examples, but it also increases our community well-being, lowers our sense of isolation. Affordability, clean energy is cheaper than any other source right now, and solar has gotten cheaper way more quickly than anyone has guessed. There's sort of questions about profitability, and there are a lot of sort of nuances to all of this, but if we think about what the most affordable ways to power our lives, and also the most secure from a geopolitical perspective, given the space that we're in right now, how can we get US made power as well? There are a lot of pros to going clean. And so that's one way that I think about this, is that I don't fault the people that aren't doing enough. I think it's the systems at play. And the systems at play care more about affordability and a bit about health and community well-being. So how can we frame this into those categories and make sure that it's crystal clear that there are a lot of jobs in the clean energy space? There's a lot of great economic reasoning to be able to do this. And I think one, that sort of messaging is one side of things. The other side of things, and I'll stop after this so you can, I'm sure, ask questions or sort of take me where you want to take me. But the other side of things is I've also come to believe that it does have to get a lot worse before it gets better. That some pieces of the system have to be unable to continue for us to be able to change those pieces. And so the insurance industry is struggling to keep up with climate risk right now. They are pulling out of insuring homes because they can't make money when it comes to insuring a home in Miami. And when we think about the entire financial sector of the entire world, insurance is a big piece of that, right? And so it's not totally crumbling. Things haven't totally fallen apart yet. And I don't believe that everything has to fall apart for things to change, but I do think it's going to take some critical points of the system to start faltering. And I mean the economic system, the social system that we live in, for us to then be able to build a different system that is more environmentally and human friendly in the way that we'd want to.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with it. What scares me is this concept of accumulating tipping points, the climbing out of that hole. The first part about being in a hole is stop digging. We haven't stopped digging yet. Let's go back a little bit and talk to me a bit about the impact that the Citizens United ruling had on long-term policy, fossil fuels versus clean energy.
Yeah. So Citizens United was, I think, in some ways exactly the type of power and storytelling that we need to start building, which is, one, it's Citizens United. And so it is a bunch of people coming together to be, saying, hey, this future that you guys are building for us, we actually don't want. And then, so that's on the sort of people coming together, building power there. And then I think, secondly, the storytelling side of it is really strong. I know one of the main lawyers who was a part of it, who wouldn't probably go on a podcast and say this, but essentially said it was more of it was more of an example. What is the word that I'm trying to look for? It's more of, instead of pushing the needle and changing things institutionally, it was more of a case study or an example of, God, cut this part out of the podcast, please. But
Okay.
do you know which word I'm
I
trying
think
to
I
think
know.
of?
I think I know where you're going. The
Yeah,
thing that I was really interested in, though, is that
yeah.
the decision the Supreme Court made
Mhm.
classifying corporations as people.
Oh, shoot. I was wondering if that was
No,
if
that's fine
I was
because I
thinking about it
like the other
differently.
I like the other comment as well. And that I was
Yeah,
like, yeah, okay, I got it. But if you look at what you push up against
yeah,
when
yeah,
you've
yeah.
got some of the wealthiest companies in the world that have unlimited power to literally purchase their favorite politician,
Yeah.
um, that is a pretty steep hill to climb when you're
Mhm.
trying to put through something like this. Now, is it climbable? Yeah, I think that the last administration made some very positive steps in the direction we
Mhm.
wanted to go. That
Yeah.
also happened to, I think, put our economy in the final 2 years of the last administration as the envy of the world. And
So
a
what
lot of
I
those jobs were clean energy jobs.
1,000%. So what I was actually thinking you were talking about was our children's trust, which is a legal, they essentially sued, and I'll find the name of it. And again, we can go back to Citizens United, but they filed a bunch of lawsuits on behalf of youth plaintiffs against the state, against the countries across the world. I think had some pretty critical wins, but there were more, they had less of an impact than Citizens United. Citizens United is, I think, one of the clearest turning points in our country's history over the last few years that has gotten us to the place that we are today, where
Yeah.
people are sort of like, well, we're close to, an autocracy. We're close um, to Trump being, a dictator. I'm like, well, I think we're a lot closer than close. I think we're pretty there, and I think Citizens United actually paved a lot of the way for that to happen, and for Elon to sort of own, like the whole Elon Trump thing would not have been possible without Citizens United.
You just talk about the irony of all that with tax credits being taken away from electric
Right.
vehicles. I think the only two bulwarks we have left that
Mm-hmm.
I think are going to probably see us through. One is Trey Parker and Matt Stone at South Park.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is these people are idiots.
Yeah.
They're just dumb.
Yeah.
And the things they're doing, you just look at it and you go, I'm glad you guys are morons because that's
Mm-hmm.
what's actually occurring. Reducing drug prices by 1,500%. That's something I'm not quite sure how that math works, but that's the
Mm-hmm.
latest thing they're pitching from a distraction standpoint. So understanding that we were probably making some progress a year ago at this time or 2 years ago at this time, and you were probably able to rally broader support in the investor community, I would guess, and awareness was rising. We're now back to the point where education bad, dear leader good, and it's all a hoax because everything's a hoax. He doesn't understand, which means whatever. So when that came in and the recent ruling around the EPA, which is going to work its way to the Supreme Court, walk me through what that's done to your efforts. And also, I'm interested to learn a little bit about how much sovereignty states like California have or Michigan has, where the car makers were actually starting to actually make money and create jobs with fuel efficient cars. How does that puzzle all fit together from a financial standpoint, from a climate impact standpoint? Can we recover from what this administration is allowing to happen?
We will, I think, have to. And so the way that I think about it is that we have very strong headwinds right now, right? Trump is in office. He's doing an incredible job of breaking things apart that will take so much longer to put back together than the amount of time it took to break apart. And the silver lining to all of this is that, maybe it can be built back up in a better way. We'll see. But intense, incredible headwinds. And I think for people that were reading about Project 2025 and sort of got a sense of what they were trying to do, it's a little bit less shocking, but it's also shocking to be living it day to day. So it's extreme is what I should say. The headwinds are extreme. It's shocking. It is powerful, and they're doing a great job at the headwinds. At the same time, there are tailwinds that are both economical and sort of market-based that will be hard to stop. There are also tailwinds that are just physical, atmospheric, like scientifically based. And so when it comes to the market ones, climate tech investors are definitely, putting their foot off the gas pedal of climate tech companies. It's absolutely happening. There's less money going in. Bill Gates and Breakthrough, I think, is a great example here, where for the at least philanthropic side of things, they took all the money that they were putting into climate and put it into global health, because that was always Bill Gates's, number one. And so yes, there's money that is being, not put into climate, that is either being saved or put somewhere else, just given what's happening at the highest level. But and I sort of pause to say this because I think it could also be really detrimental to the climate space and to the environmental space. And shockingly, from a market perspective, AI and the power demand of AI could, in theory, create enough of an economic incentive to build more clean energy that, regardless of where AI goes, could then be helpful to the larger space. And so that sort of tailwind does actually help when it comes to clean energy. And it is sort of a market incentive to keep going and to keep figuring out how to just get more power on the grid. And right now, clean energy is a great source of that. It has issues. The economics are going to be very different. There's going to be a lot of companies that die and a lot of clean energy that doesn't get built that could. But there's something there. And again, it's controversial, and who knows how it's going to shake out. The other market side is, I think, related to the physics of this, where we need to think about resilience. We need to think about insurance. We need to think about heat waves for businesses and how that's going to shift their economics as well. And I don't think that people are totally slowing down on ESG as much as you would think. I think they're calling it different things, but organizations are understanding that they do have to, for the bottom line, get smart on the risks that their business faces and get smart on how to potentially solve them. Anything there? So I was going to go to the states and the local side, because I think that's
no. Keep going. I have 1,000 questions I could ask you, but I want to please keep going.
Cool. So on the states and the local side, you're absolutely right that there's enough autonomy there for things to happen. Federal government is doing whatever they can to take away that autonomy, to own it all, to send troops to cities and totally destroy that sort of local state sovereignty. But that's our biggest play right now, and that is the play that we have to move forward on. So if we look historically, the Koch brothers have been so good at building up local power to the point where we have Trump now, right? Like, they've done such an awesome job. It was, decades in the making. And again, a lot of things to learn there from that side of things. Climate, I don't think, has totally learned how to be politically savvy, especially not on that local or sort of less sexy lens. And there's some great organizations that have been started. Climate Cabinet is one that I really love, where they focus more on getting climate savvy people into office in critical roles. And so think about Arizona, where it's really helpful to have someone in the government who can be, like, it's a sort of critical local space, and they're going to spend some amount of money, not a ton actually, because it's just a local race, but some amount of money to make sure that that person gets voted in. I think that's where we need to get politically smarter, and we need to put a lot of energy there. But things are pretty dire and they look pretty bad. So that's my silver lining. Plus, yeah, things look shitty.
I wonder, and this probably predates you, but, I was always fascinated with technology from very early days. I mean, even prior to email, gives you an idea how old I am. I was always fascinated with technology, but not necessarily as to, oh, gee, whiz bang, what can this do? But what is it I'm doing in my daily life that I can do better, faster, or smarter by using a tool that I didn't have available before? And you can go all the way back to early days where you couldn't machine a screw or you couldn't machine a bolt. Now we figured out how to do that. Well, then we had to figure out how to build a wrench that could turn that bolt. Then we had to figure out how to dig the bolt out if it broke. So tools were invented as we went. And I think about AI in much the same way. Um, AI was going to naturally evolve out of the massive and messy amounts of information that was available on an unrestricted network that was just there, the internet. Most people don't realize if you ask them to explain the internet to you, they'd have no idea what it meant or how it works. All they know is, if they need to look up a menu at a restaurant, that's what they're going to do. But when we look at AI, the misunderstanding most people have is that it's going to take over this or it's going to do something. Well, no, it's just having tools out there that can help you distinguish whether you need a flathead screwdriver, a crescent wrench, or a vice grip. They're going to do different things depending upon what you ask of it. But it doesn't replace human thought. It doesn't replace human creativity. It doesn't, but it can enable it and it can move that forward and it can help crunch large numbers. I get all of that. But I look at that. I look at climate. I look at health. Why would these be divisive issues? I mean, they're all for the common good if they're used right. How did we get to a point where the divisiveness and the politicization of these things that we're dealing with on a daily basis on things that are literally 1 and 1 always equals 2? Vaccines, good. Okay, measles, bad. How do we get there? What happened? And how do you get the message across to the hundreds of millions of people that can't remotely understand the difference between centigrade and Fahrenheit?
There's so I think, I mean, there's so much there. I think one, AI is way more powerful than we think and way less powerful than we think. I think it's somewhere in between. And I don't think it replaces human thought, and it's not, there are all these sorts of studies about how when people use it, they end up becoming less creative over time or less, good at whatever they were doing. There's a study about doctors who used it to find cancer and it helped them find cancer, but then when they stopped using it, they were worse at finding cancer. And so anyway, there's a lot to go into the AI side of things that I think is going to be fascinating to see how it shakes out. The second thing that I thought of as you were talking is another podcast called Great Simplification, or The Great Simplification. Is kind of a doomer, but I like a lot of what he says. And a lot, some of it is about just this, how quickly things are changing. And as things change, will they break or will they bend? There's a lot more there. There's sort of, the energy economy underneath everything, but would recommend that. Do you know that podcast or that person?
No, but I'm going to check it out.
It's great. I think it's really, really great. And I think there's an underpinning of a lot of what we talked about that's related to that. But then when I get to the core of what you're saying, I think, my extended family is actually very pro-Trump. And I spoke to my cousin a few years ago, who was explaining about chemicals in food. And she was like, God, there's so many chemicals in food all the time. And we can't, it's affecting our rates of children. And it is just so messed up that we have this. And I was like, actually, do you know why the EPA, do you know what the EPA does? Right. Like, do you understand? And she's really smart. And I wasn't trying to sort of, to dumb it down, but I was just explaining how, things like Citizens United have degraded the ability for us to not have chemicals in our food because corporations can do what they want, right? Like all these sort of laws, all of these ways to flatline the EPA, and 95% of those, I don't know, we should do the statistics, right? But like a large percent of those laws or reasons why we have chemicals in our food is because Republicans have put that in. And not to get too political, but when we think about chemicals, we can think about the environment, we think about climate and how they're all one thing and how it all affects our health as humans. And the reason why I say that story is because my cousin's smart, she's thoughtful, and she didn't put together the climate with the health, with the EPA, with the lowered amounts of children, right? Or like people having trouble getting pregnant. And she just said something like, if everyone had explained climate to me in this way, or environmentalism in this way to me, I'd be totally an environmentalist. So I do feel like, again, when I think about systems versus people, I've just met so many people who ultimately want good, happy, community, vibrant lives, right? Communal, vibrant lives. And they want to be healthy, they want to be happy, they want to be able to breathe their air, and they want to know that there's a future for their kids. And I just think we've been sold such bullshit for so long that it gets really lost in these echo chambers. I mean, we didn't talk about media. I think that's a huge piece of this puzzle. I think the tech
you can go,
companies.
I think you can expand it much beyond just media.
Yeah.
I think when you look at your feed in the morning and you don't even give any thought whatsoever, that your feed is dictated by an algorithm that wants to get your eyeballs on a story you probably already agree with. So you're dealing with this concept of confirmation bias and recency bias. People don't like to rethink problems. So you're only going to read the stuff that supports where you're at. If Fox News isn't telling what you want, you go over to OAN and you look at this and you're just astounded at what people actually write. And then it comes into the mainstream just most recently, looking at, the shorter term implications of tariffs. You have Justice Department lawyers who are educated and smart and competitive, who basically are telling the appeals court that if we're required to give back $150 billion in illegal tariffs, these idiots have charged, we're going to have a 1929 style depression and the world's going to end. Okay, great. How do you go from there to there without anything in between? Well, the answer is you sample the news, you read what you want, and you think anybody with an education is the enemy. And that's the fight that you're in right now.
Mhm.
We talked before. How do you make this at the grassroots level? How do you humanize it? And one of the things I always think about is I like to sleep in a bedroom that's relatively cold. So let's say I like 72 degrees. So what happens to me if I sleep at 75 degrees for a month? Oh, A, I'm probably not sleeping. B, I'm certainly not thinking clearly. And C, I'm probably going to go off the deep end in some way. But that's realistic. So just in that way. But when you put out in a climate report that the tipping point is anything above 1.5 degrees Celsius, and you ask the typical person on the street, what is 1.5 degrees Celsius in a Fahrenheit equivalency or in an absolute rise? They're like, let's see, E equals MC squared, 12 inches in a foot. I mean, they're clueless. Unless you got a background in STEM or you do that on a regular basis, the messaging doesn't get through because they're late for dinner or they're late for work or they're late for doing something else. And no one really considers it. So I think you talk about headwinds, and those headwinds are currently obviously in climate. I worry a lot about the next COVID-like crisis we face,
Mhm.
especially with what's going on now. That'll get people's attention because you're going to have, instead of 1 million people dying unnecessarily, you'll have 5 million dying unnecessarily for the same root cause as to why these people, and by the way, it always impacts the least educated the most. They're the most put upon by all of this. They
Mhm.
live in the lowest areas. They're in trailer parks that tornadoes seem to love. They can't afford their insurance, but they keep coming back for more. And this is, to me, it's a communications problem. It's a media problem.
Mhm.
It's a algorithm problem. It's a money problem. And it's really hard sometimes to step away and say, I need to read what's not here. I need to get the rest of the story in a way that I can understand. And I admire you for taking on that challenge because I know how hard it is every single day. And I love your optimism. And I'm rooting for you.
I
I
mean,
really am.
I think I'm more of a doomer most of the time. But one thing that I'll share actually is and I'll explain it briefly and got a link, but this county, Elliott County, that voted for Democrats for 144 years and then voted for Trump. And they're in Kentucky. It's this like crazy anomaly of a county. And More Perfect Union is this media company, really, that covers sort of leftist things. And they went out there and they talked to people for 15 minutes. It's a short video, 15 minutes, but I loved watching it because it was so many people that said, we're making 30K today and we made 30K 40 years ago when there wasn't inflation, and our lives have gotten worse. And we voted for Democrats over and over again, and they haven't done anything for us. I think there is a huge reckoning around, working class Americans and how so many of us are way closer to being a working class American or are working class Americans more than billionaires. And just understanding how, how politically Democrats or a new party or the left generally can come in and be actually for the people, by the people in a way that's real, that's not just talked about. So I think the working classes felt left behind for a real reason. And that was so much of what happened.
The working class, the middle class, we grow from the middle. You go all the way back to Johnson's Great Society or Kennedy asked not what your country can do and so on, where America had a vision, America as a group. We could do things, we could build things, we can imagine things. And then somewhere along the line, it's like the messaging became too diffuse. If you grew up as I did in the 60s and the 70s, I didn't question whether Walter Cronkite was telling me the truth. He didn't have an opinion. He gave me the news. Huntley Brinkley Report, 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace. I mean, these people told you the truth. They didn't give you a lot of opinion. They just told the truth. And the only reason the news was there was the only way you could get an FCC license to broadcast is you had to devote at least a half hour at the local level to providing a public service. So that became the news. Then it became a multi-gazillion-dollar business where we have divisiveness and it's 24/7 and people are doom scrolling all day going, oh shit, what? Or the internet explodes for this. And it's so distracting. It takes you away from connectivity. It takes you away from messaging. It takes you away, I think, from gaining a real understanding of what's going on. So there are things that some people have the ability to do. I love taking complexity and putting it into small bites that anyone can understand. So before I let you go, I want you to pretend I am a 4-year-old golden retriever with a learning disability that understands English in small bits. Explain to me why we are at such a critical junction right now and what I need to do on my 4 legs to try and change it.
I want to call you like Teddy or something. So Teddy.
Good name.
Thank you. There's a lot happening in the world that feels big and scary and impossible to do anything about. And that's true. There are a lot of big and scary things that we can't individually do anything about. And there are a lot of small local things that we can do a lot about. And when all of us, all the Teddies in the world, do all of these small local things, and we really focus on what we can control and physically do, and how we can do that together, then those big, scary problems actually get solved much better than thinking about those big, scary problems.
So as a 4-legged dog named Teddy, I'm able to get my owners to really do anything I want. They don't know that I can outsmart them all the time. How do I tell my owners what to do to get involved at the local level? What do they do to support what you're doing? Where do I point them, Candice? How do I get them going?
Understand who your owners are and what they like and what their disposition is. And if it's a bit more, be political, so it could be making certain calls, it could be volunteering locally at a shelter. Essentially, I would recommend focusing on one thing at the local level that is sort of an extracurricular thing that you can do, where you're also doing it with other people. So you're building community at the same time, and you are empathetic and open to everything else that's happening in the world, but you're actually just focused on the thing that you can do.
Well, most dog owners might be opinionated, but they're all also suckers for what their dog wants
Yeah,
because we
exactly.
want to keep that pup happy. Candice, it's
Yeah.
been a pleasure having you on. There's so much to unpack here. Obviously, I'm on your side. I wish you the best of luck. I hope we get through it on the other side. Last thing I'll mention is how Hollywood has treated climate change, and
Mm,
probably the most meaningful movie
mm,
around climate change I've seen in recent years. Most people will talk more about time dilation when they see it and understanding what Einstein came up with in his general and special theory of relativity, which was the movie Interstellar,
mm,
which if you watch, they get it, they get all the stuff correct on things we're not even certain of yet. And
mm,
people really go into that. Although if you believe in Newtonian physics and what Einstein's discovered, you've got to believe the thing about space and time. But the reason it's all happening is because what the climate has done, and Earth is basically becoming a dead planet,
mm,
which is not what people talk about when they see that movie. They talk about the other stuff. So even though I think they tried to go after it, it was like, oh, it's going to be okay. We're going to find other planets to live on, and we'll all end up living out in space. So I don't know how much it did for climate change, but that's always fascinated me. I thought it was a really great movie anyway.
I'm gonna check it out. I thought you were gonna say Don't Look Up.
Oh, that one too. I mean, that
Yeah.
one, that one to me had more of a sarcastic bend to it,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I think the messaging was spot on. But I still have a vision when I see Interstellar, which I've watched a couple of times, of Cooper
Hmm.
driving across just fallow wheat fields.
Yeah.
It just nothing's ever going to grow because we've reached the tipping point and never came back.
Hmm.
Anyway, you've been
The
listening
goal.
to If the Public Only Knew. My guest today has been Candice Ammori. Candice, where can people find more out about what you're doing and learn this? How do we find you?
climatevine.co. So climatevine.co.
Very cool website. Candice, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll send you all the links and publicize this as much as possible. It's something that is certainly shouldn't be on anybody's back burner.
Yeah.
Something we all have to push, and I agree with you. We have to push it every day. I wish you
Yeah.
nothing but the best of luck going forward.
Thank you, Gary. This was awesome. Thank you so much
Thank you
for
so
doing
much.
this.
This has been Gary Cinderbrand on If the Public Only Knew. Catch you on the next show.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.